So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining this second panel event of MedForward. MedForward is an organization that was recently founded, and our main goal is to just make medical opportunities aware to students and also connect students with other medical professionals so that you can receive mentorship and just other opportunities. So, today we have 6 lovely medical students who want to present about their experiences, how they got into medical school, and just give you different tips on how to apply and anything you might have. And we will get started right now by introducing.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Monica Devaraju, and I'm here with my lovely colleagues. I'm a second-year medical student at the University of Washington. I graduated last spring, also at the University of Washington, with a bachelor's in biology. And my future goals are neurosurgery, research, and academia. And like the last bullet point says, I was a transfer student during undergrad, so I had to navigate that, but it's definitely doable. So if you have any transfer related questions, feel free to shoot them to myself and I think Taryn as well. That's all for me.
Guys, my name is Britt. You might hear some cats screaming in the background. I am a cat lady. So I am a current MD PhD student at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson. I'm a second year, and my PhD will probably be in neuroscience. So I'm a non-traditional student from a small town called Boring, Oregon, and it is a real place. And I kind of grew up low income and was a first generation college student, so I've navigated kind of the horrible aspects of that. So I'm happy to help anybody who has questions about that. I got a Bachelor of Science in Biology from PSU, did an honors research thesis in extremophile virology. I took 3 gap years, so I've had a lot of different jobs. I kind of discovered a passion for science education and science outreach. And then I spent about 2 years as a lab manager in nephrology and hypertension, where I got a lot of publications, a lot of really good experience. And I'm interested in neurology, internal medicine maybe, and neurosurgery.
Hi, I'm Joanne DeHowitt. I am a second-year student at the University of Washington School of Medicine. I got my Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience, and I got it from Washington State University. I took a gap year, so I graduated in 3 years from undergrad because I had a lot of AP credits. And so I wanted to take a year off to kind of relax before heading straight into medical school. And during that year, I worked as a research assistant on an Army base, working with telemedicine kind of, and doing a research project on that. And I also spent my year getting married, making some money, had a good time. So it was a nice year. My future goals are to go into a residency in psychiatry right now. I also thought about pain medicine for a while too. So those are kind of my top 2 right now. I want to work in a community program and maybe do some private practice psychotherapy. So that's something that's kind of unique about psychiatry. Other jobs I considered, I know that a lot of people go into medicine and it's the one thing that they've kind of always wanted to do. For me, I considered a couple of different things. I thought about social work for a long time. I thought about veterinary school. That was really big at the undergrad I went to. So I thought about becoming a vet for a long time. And I also considered a nurse practitioner. And then when it came down to it, of course, I fell in love with medicine. So that's what I ended up doing. But I'm happy to talk about how you can kind of narrow it down to be sure that this is what you want to do.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Yelena Mishkovin. I'm also a second year at UW School of Medicine, just like Joanne and Monica. I got my bachelor's in biology with a chem minor at UW, but in one of the smaller campuses. So I'm a big proponent of smaller campuses, just from my educational history. Gap year where I worked as a program coordinator at a hospital in Seattle. And throughout that time, I just found it really important to take a day off so that you can do something that really helps, I don't know, feed your soul, whether that's volunteering and then exercising or something that's also self-care related, but also serving others, keeping you grounded. Ideally, I want to go into family medicine residency with OB practice as well. And I'd love to work with Doctors Without Borders. It's been a dream of mind for a long time. And I actually started pre-nursing. So I was gonna go to nursing school, and then after a few years switched to go to medicine.
Hey everyone, my name is Pearl Wing. I'm a third-year medical student with the University of Washington School of Medicine, like Taryn is, and you'll hear from her afterwards. So as you can see, I did have 4 gap years between graduating college and getting into med school, and I did apply to med school 3 times. And so I guess my story is basically that if you don't get it on your first try, just keep on going, especially if you know that becoming a physician is truly what you want to do. And so contact me if you have some questions about that, what it's like to be a non-traditional student, what I did during those gap years. As for my future goals, I guess I saw being at a community health center is where it's like the best spot for where public health, social justice, and medicine meet. If you haven't had a chance to shout out a community health center, I highly suggest you do it, just because it's essentially where primary care is at its finest.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Taryn. Some of you might have met me last week at my previous presentation. I am also 3rd year at UW. I recruited all these lovely people, which is why you're seeing lots of UW students here. My degree was in biochemistry. I also went to UW Bothell, like Yelena. And then I had 2 gap years where I worked as a program manager for a clinical volunteering program that then Yelena also get involved with. So we joke that she followed me because then she came over to UW Spokane. But it was very, very nice to have her there. Future goals, I think I want to go into pediatrics because I just enjoy working with kids so much more than adults. And I'm not sure if I want to do inpatient versus outpatient versus specialty yet, but that all will come. And then something that's really important to me is continuing to mentor and teach pre-meds, medical students, and residents. I could see myself becoming like a faculty member at a school, like many of, all of our faculty at our school are doctors for the most part. So I could see myself doing something like that, or just like letting residents, being an attending who works for the resident team or something like that. And like Pearl, it also took me a couple cycles to get in. I applied twice, and so happy to answer any questions about reapplying. And then, yeah, I've also been really involved with a lot of different things at my school, including like volunteering, mentorship, teaching, and leadership roles. So happy to talk about kind of that balance in medical school.
Awesome. So now we're going to go into the questions, and yeah, so you guys can speak about each one, and then we'll keep moving along.
I can start with this. So the question is, what is more important, BCPM or overall GPA? And I think that this largely depends on your major, because if you have more BCPM or biochem, phys, math credits, it's going to be harder to sway your GPA the closer you get to graduating. And if you find the GPA is an issue, it's definitely helpful to focus on an upward trend. I know that grades can be just a huge source of stress overall for pre-meds. And with med schools moving more towards the pass-fail curriculum during the preclinical years, as well as the big licensing exam in medical school, step 1 also being pass-fail, I think that that's going to reflect in admissions as well. So, I mean, that should make you feel better no matter kind of where you are in your pre-med journey, whether you're in high school, in undergrad, or beyond undergrad, because it's not just a numbers game anymore. And I think it's more important to have things that you enjoy talking about and to highlight your motivation for medicine.
I think that your BCPM GPA is absolutely important. It'll make your life a lot easier when applying, just trying to do well during your science courses. But I know that science courses in college is hella difficult. And so if for the first 2 years you feel like, man, like my Gen Chem GPA just isn't what it should be to be a competitive applicant, take your last years of undergrad and focus on the upward trend that Monica was talking about, just because I think nowadays the admissions committee should be focusing on a more holistic evaluation of your application. So if they see that during your first 2 years, they understand that you just transitioned from a high school learning environment to this big college learning environment. And so they should understand that it takes a while to readjust your learning style. And so if they see that your last 2 years where you're taking more difficult science courses, that you're doing well in them, they should take that into consideration. And so I think that first and foremost, like, prioritize your science courses, but if not, it's definitely not the end of the world. And so then you can focus on your overall GPA for like the last 2 years.
Yeah, totally agree with Pearl. The last thing I'll mention for this is I think showing a volume of BCPM workload is also important. So whether you're going back for a post-bac or you're in your junior or senior year, not just having those BCPM credits, but having a few quarters where you can show that you're taking, a full course load of science classes, I think will also help show that you're ready to take on the medical school course load as well.
All right, I can chime in on this one. So I think the first thing that's most important for you to know is that picking a medical school is a very individual process. So something that may be really important to one person may not even make the list of someone else when considering what factors are important. So I really encourage you all, when you're trying to pick medical schools, to do some self-reflection and try to figure out what's most important to you. And use that as your guiding principles when you decide where to apply to. So things that I personally looked at, location was a big one. I wanted to stay in Washington State, not only for the very nice in-state tuition, but also I just grew up here, and these are like the kind of communities that I would want to practice in. But even then, in deciding which, so like our school, UW, has 2 campuses, one in Seattle, one in Spokane, which is in Eastern Washington, if you are unaware. And I'm originally from Eastern Washington. And so, I picked the Spokane campus in part because I was closer to home, but also being in a smaller community, like Spokane has a very well-developed medical community, but it's a lot cheaper to live here. There's a lot less traffic. And yeah, it's just a more relaxed environment to live in, or at least I found it that way because of those factors. And maybe those seem like silly factors to you, but when I was living on the west side of the state and commuting like an hour and a half each way every day, it was like draining on my soul. So I really wanted a nice, like easy commute, so I didn't have to worry about, I didn't want to add extra stress while I was in medical school. So that was a big factor that I thought about, but there's so many other things that maybe are important to you. Other things I encourage you to look at are like the orientation of the program. So a lot of programs may have a more like research, they like require their students to do some kind of like lab or clinical research, versus other ones might have a more community service focus where you have to do some kind of service project. And like for me, I don't enjoy research at all. So I tried to avoid applying to any of the schools that were heavily into research because I knew I didn't want to do that during med school. So those are just 2 big things that I thought of when I was applying to schools.
I'd love to add on to one other thing here, and just say that my recommendation when you finally get to that time when you're applying and you're interviewing is to try to get find one connection of a current medical student, maybe just one, maybe an email, just so you can ask them, because a lot of this information I think either requires a lot of research on the front end, but it can be very easily answered if you're able to make a connection from somebody who goes to that school. So for example, I knew Taryn, and so I was able to reach out to Taryn, which was a huge blessing. But for one of the other schools that I interviewed at, I simply reached out and I said, what do you love about your campus and what are the cons? Because they're going to be a lot more honest with you and nuanced about things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of that could help influence your decision, and you'd maybe not have thought of it, but say, hey, I actually love the idea of a short commute, or I love that it sounds like you can really easily talk to your faculty. So that's just a little piece of advice.
Just one more thing I wanted to add on to both the great things that Elena and Taryn have said here, is the importance. At least I felt, and if this isn't a priority for you, that's okay too, but there's a difference in, as Monica mentioned earlier, that pass-fail curriculum the different schools can have, and if it's a true pass-fail, so the definition of like the true pass-fail is that they don't rank you during your preclinical years. And I think that kind of really helps create a collaborative environment. That's my bias. Other people don't really mind it so much. But just so you know, that tends to be kind of like a big divide that a lot of people use when choosing which schools to apply to. Is
I guess I'll hop in on this one. So one thing that I've found in building relationships with mentors is that if you are as you possibly can be, it tends to work out for the better. Like I've been called the queen of dorky emails sometimes, because in undergrad, if I'd get excited about science or like anything in a class, I would usually just like bite the bullet and send off like a quick couple sentences to the professor and say, hey, I'm really interested in this. I was really excited. I was wondering if you know of any opportunities in the university that relate to this. And that's kind of how I got my first lab experience in biology, is that I was freaking out about how cool viruses were, and then landed in a really cool virology lab. And one thing is, like, if you have to pretend to be someone else to get along with a faculty or mentor, it's kind of a good sign that you're incompatible, like in terms of personality. And it's totally okay if you don't vibe well with people. It doesn't mean that you're messed up or they're messed up or that any mistakes were made. Sometimes you just don't vibe very well with people. And it's totally okay to drop that, well, not drop the relationship, but just like look for other opportunities. And I think that you can potentially run into some major supervillains in your life, especially if you're going the MD PhD route, because you have to deal with gender bias and pretty much all the isms. Like if you fall into any underrepresented category, for example, like I'm disabled and I ran into a lot of ableism. But in the end, if you think of those supervillain situations as just like good essay or interview material, it kind of helps you get through it. Like I wrote a lot about ableism for a scholarship application that I recently won, and a lot of my med school applications like were sprinkled here and there with experiences that I had with kind of bad into a learning experience, I guess. So even those bad relationships are kind of good for you to go through and learn from.
Okay, so you saw a little bit of a preview. And actually, I think there's a lot of pressure for pre-meds to apply to medical school during your junior year so that you can matriculate right out of college, which that's not bad at all. Like if you can do it, because med school is going to be an investment of not just your mental energy, but time. But then, so like in I guess like a short summary, when you apply for medical school, you have to get all these letter of recommendations, you write your personal statement, and you collect like a list of extracurricular activities you've done, like volunteering, shadowing, and you write a short paragraph about every single one. And so that all encompasses your primary application that gets sent to all the schools. And if the school likes what they see on the first view of who you are on paper, they'll send you a secondary application, which means that you have to write more essays, like that's specific to the questions that they have. And after that, they will like you, and so they'll send you an interview, and you go for the interview process, and there's a waiting period until you get your acceptance. So the different components, I think the number one tip I have for applicants is when you're writing, make sure you always put the why. Like for example, like if you're volunteering at a children's hospital, don't just say that you're volunteering because you enjoy working with kids or that you aspire to be a pediatrician. They always want to know the specific reasons of why. It could be that you enjoy working with children just because you appreciate the type of language and diction you use with kids when explaining diagnosis or why they're feeling not so great. So if you can see, like, from the first example that I gave to like the second one, there's a whole difference. In the second one, it makes me think that, oh, this applicant really knows what they want out of their volunteer experiences, and that it's actually meaningful and they're actually engaged with the activity. With reapplying to med school, I think hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the session to talk more about it, because I wanted to make sure that Monica has a chance to give her comment about this question. But reapplying, it's a process, but I think it's a good learning process in terms of introspection and figuring out what you want out of medicine and the type of physician you want to be, because you have these gap years to, I guess, pursue all these various experiences, and what you learn from those experiences actually shape how you identify who you are, the type of communities that you want to serve, and I guess the type of difference you want to make as a physician.
Thanks, Pearl. That was an amazing, like, broad overview of the application, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Pearl hit it on the nail when she said that highlighting your motivation to pursue medicine is very important in both your primary as well as your secondary application. There's definitely a stress on applying early in the cycle, and for good reason. Like you guys saw, I myself applied much later in the cycle. I actually looked back at my MCAS application, and my application was processed the end of September. So it was October by the time I was receiving secondaries. What I'll say about that is that if you know that you want to apply in, say the upcoming cycle, do it. But don't let applying late, like if you come to a decision later on in the cycle, July, August, September, if you come to a decision that, hey, you already, maybe personal circumstances have changed, don't let, the timeline, I think, kind of jade you from putting in an application. I also want to say that applying is not really a what's there to lose, or you don't really have anything to lose type of situation. The example I'll give here is that if you do apply to a medical school and they give you specific advice, they reject you and they give you specific advice such as, we'd like to see you improve in terms of your clinical experience, or we didn't kind of see your motivation for medicine really shine through. You want to be able to have time to implement those changes. And if, the time when you get your advice to when the next cycle opens is like a month, it might be too early to reapply. So you're, again, pushing your application off by another year, which means it'll be 2 years before you actually matriculate into med school if you are accepted. So deciding to apply to med school is a big decision. But hopefully Pearl's answer and my answer gives you a little bit of guidance as to where to start. And the last thing I'll say about this question is that the application itself is very important. The application, like the actual MCAS application, is not just, oh, like I've done all the hard work of being a pre-med, now it's just about filling this piece of paper out and submitting it. Spend a lot of time on your application, and I would specifically recommend converting your MCAS application into a PDF document, which they allow you to do on their website, and looking through page by page and having people you trust look through your actual application before you submit it.
I just want to jump in. Oh, sorry. Can I say two quick things on the last one? So piggybacking off of Pearl's and like the importance of saying why, to help you with that, write everything down now. So if you are in the middle of doing your like volunteering and clinical stuff and blah, 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 and you have all these great patient stories or these wonderful moments that are like, yes, this is why I want to go into medicine. I'm going to remember this forever. I guarantee you will not remember this forever. You will sit down to your application 2 years later and you'll be like, oh my gosh, what have I even been doing for the last 4+ years? So please, please, please start a Word document or an Excel and keep track of your hours, the dates that you were involved, your supervisor contact info, a description of like what you did in that activity. And then really the most important part is your reflections or stories of any important moments that really helped you on your path to deciding to become a physician, because that is basically all of what your personal statement is about. And it's also super important when you're writing your work and activities. You're not just saying what you did, you're also saying what you learned and how this has prepared you for medicine. So seriously, write it down. I'm trying to be better about that in medical school because it will save you so much stress later on. And then the only other thing I wanted to comment on from Monica's description, so hopefully we'll talk more about reapplying later, but I just want to put out there. So I reapplied 2 cycles. I applied the cycle right after because, and also to Monica saying, like, so oftentimes you can do a review and find out like advice on how to reapply, but not all of that advice is good advice. And I want to be able to share my story about that later. But I just want to say you have to take all advice with a grain of salt when it comes to your application, and really just decide what's right for you. Like I decided for me, I had the experiences to reapply the very next cycle. I just didn't do a good enough job of representing myself. So that's a very personal decision that you have to come to, and we can talk more about that later.
I wanted to add a very tiny cherry on top here that I've heard people regret not taking gap years, but I haven't really heard anybody regretting their gap years. So that's something to also think about, because if you have gap years and you enter med school, you will kind of hone in on what you're interested in, and you kind of already have like an idea of what you want to do probably, versus classmates that come directly from college tend to not have that same kind of drive or direction. So they're kind of still figuring out what they want to do. So it's kind of a benefit that I don't think you'll ever regret if you take a gap year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5.
All right, thank you guys. Looks like Karen and I got this one, so preparing for and after one that way is really important. I know on my interview days when I would go to them, I'd see some people like shuffling a lot and feeling uncomfortable because you don't wear a business suit every day. So it's just something to just appear a little more confident, just feel good in your own clothes. Actually can really put the cherry on top there. But in terms of the different types of interviews, the main ones that I ran into were MMI, or multiple mini interviews, traditional interviews. So that's one where you just sit and you either talk to a panel of people, or maybe you have like a couple with one person. And then also a third type called a group interview. Anyone's welcome to jump in if they actually had one of those. I did not have a group one, and I've heard they're less common, but I can give a couple of comments of the advice that I got for them should I have gotten one. So for the multiple mini interview, you go into separate rooms, like they'll give you a prompt on the outside of the door, and sometimes it's like an ethics question and you have to go in. So you read it, you think for a little bit, and then you go in and you answer it to one person, and then you move on to the next room and the next room. They have you do like 7 or 10 of them, or I can't remember how many were in the one that I did, but it's multiple. I would make sure to practice with your school if they have the opportunity. Some schools have like a pre-med center that has the multiple mini interview stations, because that's becoming more and more popular as an interview format. So if you have the opportunity to do that, it helps to just get practice and practice trying to formulate your answer in a shorter period of time. There's also some websites, like I know UW Bioethics, you're welcome to look at that one specifically, but there are other sites that will have little ethical scenarios for you to look at. And it can be really helpful to just read through the scenario, think of what you would say, and time out your answer. So you can just literally set a timer on your phone and see how long it can take you to explain what you do in that situation as a horizon. For the traditional interviews, I would say practice with advisors, practice with upperclassmen if you know them. So after all this, we'll get our emails from an upperclassman from my top choice. UW, and go, you can trust what they're going to say, as Taryn said, because not all advice is necessarily the best advice, but it's still good to hear from different kinds of people. And then lastly on that, I would say it can help to record. I know nobody hates, or at least, okay, I hate nothing more than the sound of my own voice. So like, I want to be able to watch this recording. It just makes me cringe. I hate it. But that's actually the best thing to do, I found, for like I said, okay, why do you want to practice medicine? And I put a camera down and I set it to the camera and I watched it and I hated it. And I did it like 10 times. Not so much to the point where your answer is 100% scripted. You know, you don't want to sound like a robot on the day, but just learning to feel comfortable talking about those things in a shorter period of time can be really good. Also for group interviews, so this is one I don't have too much to say because I said they're more uncommon, but I would say you don't want to be, the advice I've heard is you don't want to be the loudest, the only one answering, and you're always first and you're cutting other people off, and you also don't want to be the person that always has to wait to go last, is the quietest and might not have as much to say. I think group interview formats are just horrible anyways, but if you have to do them, just try to stay consistent and try to stay somewhere in the middle, but maybe everyone's trying to do that, so it's difficult. But that's the best advice I've heard for that.
Yeah, I think Joanne did an awesome job of summarizing the different types and everything. The big piece of advice that I always like to give to people piggybacks off to my last piece of advice of it, writing your stories down, because not only do you need that in your application, but you also need to bring those stories up during your interview. So I did a bunch of mock interviews for incoming students when I was in medical school, and also in my previous job, I interviewed a lot of students for leadership positions. And the thing that would always, the thing that people do a lot, and I'm super guilty of this, is like not answering a question in a specific way and just talking generally. And what's better to do, and I'll give an example in just a sec, is to use a story. So like a common question that's asked during medical school interviews is, what is your greatest strength? Or what is your greatest weakness? And I think the best way to answer those questions is to be like, I think my greatest strength is blank, and then launch into a story where you displayed that strength. So, the beauty of telling a story is really twofold. First, it does the whole show versus tell thing. So rather than saying, oh, I'm so hardworking and I do blah, 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 like it's just very generic stuff that anyone can say. But like telling a specific story, your interviewer can actually see how you put that strength into play. Same thing goes for like a weakness, or, they'll often ask like, tell us about a time when you had an argument with someone, and having those stories like written down and reading over them before you go into interview is super crucial to helping you remember those experiences. And then you can bring it up when those questions get asked. The second thing is that your stories is how you are going to stand out. I know there is a ton of pressure to feel like, oh, I have to do all these crazy different activities to stand out. And honestly, I've only read about like 30 people's applications at this point, and I don't think it's possible to stand out really for the most part, because everyone has such similar types of activities, and that's not a bad thing. But the way that you stand out is by telling your stories and your experiences, because nobody else can tell them the same way that you can. And I've seen that many times over when I am doing a mock interview with someone. If they tell a really great story, that really sticks in my mind. And so, yeah, that would be my best thing, is just tell lots of stories, try to do them succinctly. Like Joanne was saying, that's a super important part, is to get the highlights of the story and not spend 5 minutes telling the entire story, but, hit the highlights, and then you can reflect on that to say, like, this is what I learned from the experience. This is how it's going to help me in medicine, etc.
I can start with this one. So in terms of, the MCAT is kind of a beast. I'm sure that everybody's heard about it. It's that exam that you take that basically is used as one of the quantifiers to see whether you're going to get into medical school. Before I kind of go into this, I did want to give a little bit of a disclosure that my MCAT was kind of slightly above average. It wasn't anything amazing. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why to be completely transparent, I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciate the UW, because I feel like they did a real holistic look at my application. In terms of tips on studying for it, it's really context dependent. If you're working at the same time, which I was working, I was supporting myself at the same time. So it was something where I really had to focus during the weekends and then take a little bit of time after work every day. So my recommendation is that use the MCAT as a way to kind of, in a sense, sort of prep for what you're studying is going to be like for medical school. So try to pencil it in as much as you can and to the level that you can while you're balancing work and volunteering and all of the pre-med lifestyle. And at the same time, take weekends to do practice tests. Like 100%, I recommend taking as many practice tests as you can. So on the AMCAS website, they do offer some practice exams, and they have different packages that you can buy, but also if you come from a point of financial difficulty, you can apply for their scholarship program where they will actually give you some practice exams to take. And just sitting down at the very beginning, that was one of the first things I did, because there's so many resources. And the first thing I did was I sat down and I took one of those practice tests just to get exposure to those types of questions. And that was just beyond helpful for me to get an idea of what I'm going into, what I really need to practice, where my weak points are. And then from that, I'd say I personally studied for about 2 to 3 months during the weekends and kind of trying to pencil it in during the weekday. But I know that it's really dependent on what your study style is. And it's so helpful to talk to somebody who's taken the exam before, because that way you can say, oh, or do our learning styles match up? Maybe I can kind of do something similar to what you did.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything that Elena said. I think really the most important thing is kind of on that subject of study styles is figure out what works best for you, because that's going to be different for everyone. Like for me, I bought a set of books and started trying to study on my own, and found myself quickly getting distracted and not really being able to prioritize MCAT studying along with my regular studying. And so I saved up the money that I earned during summers, and I took an MCAT class, which I understand can be very expensive and is not feasible for everyone. So I totally acknowledge, my privilege in being able to do that. But I found it super helpful because it gave me more of a structure and also access to a lot of different resources, like what Elena said about doing practice tests and practice questions is so important. There's actually this thing, hopefully you don't mind, there's this thing called the learning retention pyramid. Sorry, Akila, I'm going to steal your screen real quick so I can pull this up, just show everyone, and then you can take back over. But I want to show this learning pyramid that I think is really helpful. So, what it's showing is basically the different types of learning and like how much people generally retain from that, for those different types of learning. And you'll see a lot of us learn by like lectures and reading and stuff like that. But really what people have found is like the things that help the information really stick in your mind is practice doing through practice questions and practice exams and teaching others. Like I did this a lot in med school where I got together with a couple of my friends and we would talk through the like different topics for the upcoming test, and like each of us would like go over different concepts and be able to ask questions and give clarification. And that was super helpful for me because I knew once I was able to teach it to someone else, then that meant that I really knew it. So yeah, instead of rereading your notes or just reading the textbooks, I definitely encourage you to try to do some of these more active styles of learning, especially practice questions, teaching others. But again, do what works best for you. If you can read a book and you have like a photographic memory or something, and you can remember everything, you go for it. You do what you. But I think that was one of the biggest things that I had to learn, was to really make sure that I was doing more active learning, because that was what was most helpful for me. All right, Akila, sorry I stole your screen for a second, but I always like to show that pyramid because I think it's helpful.
I just wanted to ask, like, when did you guys start studying? So, like, did you guys study between the school years, so like in the summer, or did you do it during the school year with like less heavy science courses?
Yeah, great question. Sorry, we neglected that part of the question. So I started studying about a year before I took the MCAT, meaning I got a set of books. And like over the summer when I was only working, I did pretty well staying up to date on that. But as I mentioned earlier, I got really like behind in my MCAT studying when I started up school again in the fall because it was hard to prioritize. I'm taking the MCAT in 6 months versus I have a physical chemistry test next week. That's really hard to do. So that was one thing that I found helpful about taking the class is it forced me to prioritize doing that. But really, I think you only really need like a couple of months of really solid, like dedicated studying to do well. If you can do it when you take a lighter class load, that's awesome. If you have a summer off and can do more practice questions, I think just doing it for a few months, or if that doesn't really work out for you, your schedule's too hectic, then definitely do a little bit each week. I think it just really depends on you and your circumstances, but whatever you can do to make it consistent and make sure you keep doing it is the most important thing, no matter what strategy you go with.
This is a me question. So one thing is that the better MD PhD programs will have that balance already made for you. Like they have this built-in balance that students can choose to overstep or not. So like my school, we have our MD years, we have our PhD years. You're either like a grad student or a med student. And also your stipend comes from either one department or the other, and it never comes from both. So usually you have like both feet in one or the other. However, during like easier parts of med school, I did go to lab meetings and I did hang out with a lot of different labs to try to understand like where I would be a good fit for my PhD. And next week, I'm in my second year, so next week I'm doing some light lab work just to get to know the lab. So you can totally kind of do a little bit of both during med school and during the PhD. In my PhD years, I'm planning to do a lot of free clinic volunteering because I'll still be a med student too. And also every year of the PhD grad student years, we have to take the OSCE, which is like a clinical exam skills test, just to make sure that we still know clinical stuff. So make sure that you still have your skills and that you're still practicing and thinking about clinical stuff while you're pipetting in a basement for 12 hours a day. But everyone that I know who researched, actually joined a lab and worked on research projects throughout their first and second years of med school, everyone I know that did that regretted it immensely because their STEP score suffered and also their grades suffered. But most importantly, they didn't really have the freedom to seek out opportunities to get to know different mentors at the school or reach out to or kind of identify opportunities throughout the school because they were so focused on just doing the classes and then going into the lab. So they kind of missed out on a lot of leadership opportunities and things like that. So the good programs will balance it for you, and it's kind of up to you whether you want to mess with that balance or not. I only mess with it a little bit, so that's my advice there.
Pearl, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. Career interests I was thinking about. I was actually wanted to be a writer and a fashion designer at some point, just because being creative was just so good for my soul, and I loved how I felt when I wrote or when I drew and painted. So it just felt great. But obviously, my parents were wanting me to think about financial stability afterwards, and I wasn't sure whether this was just a hobby or whether I could actually make a career out of it. And so now it's just a hobby that I do to de-stress from med school, which is great, which is what I discovered during my gap years. But those career interests were completely far beyond medicine. And the turning point in my journey was, I think it's always I feel like there's always a theme of this personal story of something you've witnessed, whether it's with a friend or you've seen. Me, I had living in Vietnam. My maternal grandma was here, and so when I visited my grandma in Vietnam, I was able to see, and back then I figured, oh my gosh, like it must be because my grandma's living, both grandmas are living in 2 different countries, so 2 different healthcare systems. And I had this like super heroine idea that, okay, I'm gonna become a doctor, I'm gonna bring my, and all that stuff. And so I think seeing the difference in, even though they were about the same age, seeing a difference in how they moved about the world, how they were talking to me, the types of meds they were taking was just like the thing that made me think, okay, if I'm going to go into medicine, I'm going to make sure that other people's grandmas don't have to feel this way themselves.
That's such a thoughtful answer, Pearl. My answer is less exciting. Prior to undergrad, I felt strongly about wanting to be a doctor, but it was more of an intuition and a gut feeling. And undergrad definitely gave me the backing for my interest in medicine. And I think I better understood what the path to becoming a physician entails. And I played around with the idea of doing research at some point, but kind of asking myself the question of, is this something I can see myself doing for the rest of my life, was always a helpful question in terms of thinking about potential alternate career paths. And for me, it was, I have no reason to sway from medicine. So, yeah.
And just one more thing. So like the field of medicine is so vast. Like in primary care, you see, or I guess in other specialized medicine and more. And so the reason why I wanted to be a physician specifically was because I like the autonomy that came with being a physician. I like, being able to blaze like my own path. I didn't want to have to answer to anybody. And I felt that becoming a physician would allow me to pursue more leadership roles in the future. So I guess just consider like how you see yourself fitting within the healthcare system, yes, medical school, just because the other programs are much shorter than the path of medicine.
Yeah, that's great, Pearl. I was actually asked that exact question in my interview of why medicine, but more specifically, why do you want to be a physician? And Pearl mentioned the autonomy as a physician, and I'm head of a healthcare team, and you have to really enjoy communicating with others, whether it's parents and patients, but also other members of your healthcare team, and having that mutual respect for anyone, no matter what healthcare career you choose to go into. So yeah, that's definitely, I would say, definitely think about other careers in medicine too.
All right, so for this one about managing work and social life during undergrad and medical school, I'm sure this is something that pretty much all of us could speak to, and the difficulties that come with that. I think thinking about work-life balance can kind of be stressful. So instead, when I try to think of it, I try to think of my social life as kind of a motivating factor, that when I get through a certain chunk of time, I get to go have fun with my friends. So in my week, I try to create fun events that I have in my bullet journal or my planner or wherever I'm keeping track of what I'm doing. And to say, okay, on Thursday nights, this is when my old roommates from undergrad, we all Zoom together and we watch a dumb show and we have fun together. Or Friday nights, I don't do homework and I just hang out with my husband. I don't touch studying. And I think having it set aside ahead of time can be helpful. I don't know if any of you have ever had this issue with procrastinating, but sometimes I'll procrastinate a whole night away. And it doesn't actually feel relaxing because the whole time I'm thinking about how I was supposed to be doing something. And so it doesn't feel like a break. And the next day I'm still wired and upset about whatever I have to study for. And so one thing I've been trying to work on is setting that schedule of certain times when I'll be doing something. And when that time is up, that's when I can relax. So finding some sort of SMART goal or way to define for yourself, when this is done, I'm going to relax, because you need breaks. No matter whether you're in undergrad or in med school, you can't function without any breaks. That just doesn't work. If you figure it out, please let me know. But for me, I don't know if you guys have ever seen like those Pomodoro timers, but those are pretty popular. you do like 30 or 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You get a long break once in a while. And I think that can be helpful, and you can find time to chat with your roommates or do whatever in between. And when the day is done, just go relax. Unless you're a night studier, relax in the morning, I guess, however you do it. But you do have to make time for it, as stressful as it may seem at times. But Pearl, you can elaborate.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you said, especially setting time for breaks, because otherwise you're not going to get to it. Because I know that I'm the type of person where if I don't set a break, I'm just going to keep on going until my work is done, and that will sometimes lead me to still being awake at like 2 in the morning. So it's very unhealthy. But I guess with this question, it totally depends on how you define social life. In college, I commuted from home. I took the bus. It was like an hour bus ride each way. And so my social life mainly involved spending time with my family. I have a little brother who's 5 years younger, and my partner. And then, so I guess that's basically it, just like spending time with my family, making sure that that they know that I am still caring for them, even though I'm usually at the library all the time during undergrad. I think the tough thing with being pre-med is that you feel like you're always in this cycle of studying all the time, and you feel like you can't really catch a breath because there's always like another requirement to fulfill once you've finished with the other one. And so I guess social life in undergrad, there wasn't, I guess, really much in terms of like going out, but I think it's probably not really because I was a pre-med, but because that's just my natural baseline anyways. But in med school, social life is a little bit more different. I think like for me, Taryn was in my cohort in Spokane, and a lot of the times social life involved like these little spurts where we just talked for 10 minutes, where we just vented about things that happened in med school, whether it was a way that a specific topic was covered, whether we were feeling just hella overwhelmed because we got a low score on our exam, etc. So it's just like actually efficient venting sessions where we weren't necessarily complaining, but it's just nice to know that another person empathizes with how you feel, and you're not socially isolated or mentally isolated in med school, because it's super challenging and it often feels like everyone else is succeeding around you, and you feel like, damn, like I need to catch up, I'm in the lower ranks, etc. So social life in undergrad is very different in med school. Social life also in med school also involves making sure like you're keeping up with your fitness, if that's how you de-stress. So it's essentially like what refills your soul outside of med school, and that becomes your social life.
So I think here, I wouldn't want to spoil it for myself. Like I wouldn't want to like mess up like the space-time continuum or whatever. And I feel like I wouldn't have to tell myself to not give up, because I never do. But like, I think I would tell myself that I don't really have to beat myself up any extra, because the world already does that enough. I think when I was a pre-med, I was super hard on myself. Like if I got a bad score or something, I would really beat myself up and kind of take it to heart. And then I had a bunch of stuff happen in my life, and then I kind of learned like none of that really matters. So I think I would try to reassure myself to stop beating myself up. Maybe only one thing I would do differently is that in community college, I kind of wish that I got more involved in leadership, because I worked at my community college for like 7 years or something. I initially started as a work study student, but I was never really involved in student clubs because I didn't know they were a thing really. I didn't really know how college worked when I started course of community. And I think that if I had that in my first couple of years of college, that I would have been a lot better off just having that kind of support system built in. When I went to university as a transfer student, I kind of built like a really nice community of neuroscience nerds, and we really supported each other through a lot of different things in our life. And I think that I really lacked that in community college just because I didn't know it was an option. In terms of lifestyle choices, if I wasn't struggling financially through like all of college, man, it would have been nice. It's tough. I see Pearl clapping. At one point I had 4 roommates, and it was just like the most dramatic dumb, stressful thing ever, but it was the thing that made the most financial sense. In terms of academics, I don't really know if I have any good advice or anything that I could change in my past self. I just did the best I could with the resources I had, which was not very much. And yeah, that's all I gotta say.
I empathize with you so much. So I guess for academics, I wish that I could have spaced out all my general prerequisites a lot better. I completed Gen Chem, Gen Bio, and Gen Physics in my first 2 years of college. And so coming from high school, I was so used to like rote memorization, and I didn't actually develop that higher level of critical thinking until probably like my 3rd year of college. And so if you can, just take your time going through all the Gen Science courses. You don't have to try to complete all of those requisites within the first 2 years, even if your pre-med advisor is telling you to do so. Applying to medical school, it's a marathon. It's not like a short-term race. So just take your time and make sure that when you do apply, your application is ready and you're ready. So yes, academics, just spacing out those general prerequisites. Lifestyle choices, I guess it's kind of related to academics too, but I think I would have chosen to major in something in the arts and humanities, just because I think I decided to major in physiology, and that meant that I took all these extra science courses to fulfill that major. And I realized that I wasn't really interested in like microbio at all, but that was one of the requisites for my major. And so I was stuck with taking these science courses that honestly, like, it made no sense to me whatsoever. Like, the only science course that made sense was physiology, which is the foundation of medicine. And so don't feel like you need to be stuck with majoring in a science major just because that's what you hear pre-meds are supposed to do. And if you are still in college, definitely take as many courses as you can with the ethnic studies department. If I could go back, I would have taken a lot more courses just because the one course that I took helped me evaluate my identity as being Vietnamese, figuring out certain questions I had, and also tackling how my presence in this country is a political statement itself. So if you can take ethnic courses, do it. I think it'll broaden your mindset a lot more and give you the critical thinking that I think is like missing in the field of sciences. With extracurricular activities, find out what you love. College is a place for you to explore, and I think if you find out what your interests are, they'll carry with you into medical school, and you can actually connect those interests with how you want to be as a physician in terms of the balance. So when you're a physician, don't just think about the things you'll do in your career, but think about the ripple effects of your actions as a physician and how that carries into the community you want to serve later in the future.
I just want to piggyback super quick about what Pearl said, because I also, I thought you had to do a hard science major. So I switched from biology to biochemistry, even though I would have been so much happier in biology and probably would have gotten better grades, not because biology is easier, but because I enjoyed it more and would have, it's much easier to do well in the classes that you enjoy. That, and also not doing activities because I feel like I have to, doing them because I enjoy doing them. I think there's these like sentiments out there that you have to do X, Y, and Z to get into medical school. And truly what I've come to believe is that there are really only like 3 things, like in terms of extracurriculars, that are really required to get into med school. That's shadowing doctors, doing volunteer work, and also doing direct clinical work with patients, because med schools want to see that you know what it's like to actually be a doctor and work with patients, and you like that and you want to do that, and also that you're committed to serving others. But anything other than that, like research or leadership or, those other things, that's all just dependent on your interests. Like I personally, and other people may disagree, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary to do research unless you are interested in it. If you want to do an MD PhD like Britt, or if you're trying to go to one of those ultra competitive Ivy League schools, I feel like it's probably necessary for that. But honestly, I did research, but I hated it. And I put out my application, but then I never talked about it again because it was just like not what I was passionate about, and I was not trying to go to a research heavy school. So I think that's a big thing, is everyone's like, I have to get research. I don't think you have to. Like I said, other people may disagree. But so what I wish I would have done is not do research in undergrad and focus more on the things that I did enjoy, like mentoring and teaching, because that stuff is equally as valuable as research. And like, that's what I want to do as a part of the rest of my career. So yeah, that was my biggest regret, is not doing things I enjoyed, doing the things I felt like I had to. So yeah.
Just the bright side is now you know that you hate it, so that's a good plus. I mean, maybe you would have never known, and then in med school you would have jumped into research and then been like, oh my god, I hate this. So
yeah, that's fair. I think I had an inkling that I didn't like research before, just because I didn't enjoy, like, I mean, I haven't done clinical research, I should be clear. I've only done lab-based research, and I didn't really enjoy my lab classes, so I had a pretty good idea. I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it anyways, and I shouldn't have done it, but I thought I had to. So yeah, definitely, if you're not sure, like, for sure, give it a shot and see if you like it, but don't feel like you have to do any one thing. And certainly there's nothing that's like guaranteed. If you do this thing, you'll get into med school, and vice versa if you don't do this thing, except for shadowing, volunteering, and clinical experience. I do think those three are absolutely required, but otherwise the rest is just whatever you want to do.
I want to highlight something that Taryn mentioned. We often hear about continuity as being very important in activities during undergrad, and it's important, I think, yes, to show it, but if you find that you're doing something that you don't enjoy, like research, feel free to back out of that. There's no pressure to keep up with that. And then I also wanted to just echo what Britt and Pearl said earlier about finding things that you really enjoy, because that can really help when you're putting your application together. You know, when you find something that really speaks to you in undergrad, and it doesn't have to necessarily be medically related, you can speak about it that much more better, if that makes sense. Like, I think people can tell when things come from the heart, and I think that in itself will help you stand out. So really find things that you enjoy doing undergrad, because it'll make undergrad a lot more fun, and it'll make your med school application more meaningful.
Elena, you can start us.
Okay. I think that so much of kind of this answer has been folded into earlier sentiments shared by everybody. In terms of summers, I think it really depends. You know, I think Britt spoke to how she was working throughout school. So if you're somebody who's working throughout summer, and I work throughout my summers, so I think my big advice for summertime is to try to make your summer, gear it towards something that's going to be, you know, practical, of course, because if you have to work, you have to work. But if there's potential to maybe work in something that might be clinically related, that, you know, maybe you'll have a little bit of exposure to something that's health related, then do it. So I guess one example I could give is I was lucky enough to find an internship in industrial hygiene, which is like air quality monitoring, not very medically related. But I thought, you know what, this could be a really neat experience. It's not necessarily medical, it's not in a hospital, but it's something that would give me a chance to get a bit more public health experience with respect to just get a little bit more professional experience as well. Something like that, where, you know, just keep your mind open. I guess that's my big advice, is to be open to new experiences. And also, this was echoed before by Joanne, making sure that you pencil in time to take a trip or do something fun. You know, give yourself something to look forward to in a summer. So if it's, you know, saving up money so you can take a trip to Banff for something, or, you know, go to Yosemite, if possible for you, then that's what I would recommend. You know, try to balance that at the same time.
Yeah, that was great. Yelena said it very eloquently. I just had kind of like this little bullet point list, but I guess I can go through a couple of other points on that as well. One thing I would recommend, if you have an interest in it, or if you have the funds, because I understand that this is also kind of it can be financially difficult for people as well. But if you have an interest in studying abroad and you are in a science major, or you're still taking those you know, like those sequence classes, so like OChem 1, OChem 2, you kind of have to take both of them in that year. It can be really helpful to do your study abroad during the summer because it's not going to get in the way of any of those sequence classes that you're taking. So I know for my year, they recommended that you go on your study abroad trip like the summer after your freshman year, if that was an interest of yours. So that's just, if you're interested in that, it can be a convenient time to do it. I did it and I absolutely loved it. It had nothing to do with my major or anything. It was just an interest I had in going to Ecuador and seeing the Galapagos Islands. And so it was, again, just a good experience for me. I think Yelena did a good job of talking about, you know, if you can just throw in some things that you're maybe missing from your application or just try to strengthen it in some way if you notice there's something that's missing. I found for myself that doing shadowing during the summer was a lot easier than doing it during the school year. I didn't have a job though, so that's, you know, just something to keep in mind. But physicians, you know, only work during certain hours. And so if you want to shadow them, you have to make time for it in your schedule too. And during the summer, like there's a really cool internship. I don't know how many of you are from Washington, where I was able to go shadow for like 2 weeks, a whole bunch of different physicians and different specialties. And that was a really good time to do it and a good way to spend my summer. We talked about you can do MCAT. That's what I did because I had the time to do it and I really loved it, just devoting like 3 or 4 hours a day plus practice tests on the weekend. And that was a really good way to knock it out. Also, just about research, of course, more about this than I ever would. But for research, there are research programs you can do specifically during the summer that you can apply to and go do. So you can have that experience without trying to fit it in during the years if you're not interested in MD, PhD. So you're just looking for like a shorter experience and not like looking to get more involved, I guess. And also things that you can just do back home. I know right now with COVID, everything's a little bit messed up. So, you know, you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt right now. But some people would go, when they could go back home, they could get a hospital volunteering job or, you know, volunteer position and go and do that for most of the summer. So they could get more clinical hours in. Or like this summer, I'm in med school even. And for my summer, I started training for the crisis text line up during the school year. That's less of a time commitment during the year now that I got the training done with. So just some things to keep in mind. But overall, Yelena's sentiment of just, you know, try to make the most of it, and of course your personal situation.
Maybe Akila stepped away from her computer, but we know what the next question is. Yes, and sharing your story in a unique way while also highlighting your interest for becoming a doctor without giving a cliche story such as, I've always wanted to become a doctor since I was young because I wanted to help others. My first comment to this is that what you have to talk about doesn't have to be, committees are reading a lot of the same in terms of, you know, the things that people have accomplished. So my motto is that it's not necessarily what you say, but how you say it, which is why it's helpful to do things during undergrad that you really liked and that you enjoyed, because you can really talk about why something, to discover meaning in it. I think Taryn gave really great advice during the beginning, which is that write things down, kind of note down the experiences that you're having throughout undergrad and any aha moments that come to you. Because I found that when I sat down and started writing and putting together my application, that I really had to think about this stuff. And it was actually through the process of writing that I was like, oh, you know, I really did, I think, learn the value of life when I was working with animals. On like a basic science research project, for example. So I would say, first of all, take the pressure off of, because it's already likely been said and done. But luckily it's about showing that you're ready to take on medical school and just kind of taking time to show who you are as a person. So try to enjoy that process. I know it's not easy to talk about yourself and to strike that right balance between I'm really proud of my accomplishments and this is me and this is what I've done and kind of like bragging. But this is you time. You've put in a lot of time and you deserve to show who you are through this application. You deserve to give yourself the best shot you got.
I guess the first time I applied for med school, I did not spend nearly as much time on my primary personal statement as I should have. So in comparing my two applications to med school, like the second time I got in, the first time I didn't even get interviewed, I don't think. And I was comparing like the tone of my essays and just thinking about like the different writing processes for each. So the first time I applied, I only wrote after work, basically like 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and then went to sleep, went to work, and then worked on it again. So like I didn't have space to reflect on why I was writing what I was writing. And I think that's really important sometimes to think about your writing, and sometimes like thinking about what you want to say is more important than actually writing it, if that makes sense. Like just the process of like cognitively just going through, why do I care about this? Why do I want to put this in? Is more important than getting it down on paper sometimes. Like, so what I did is my second time around, I took a week off work, and that's all I did is I just, camped outside, thought about stuff, jotted some stuff down here and there. But for the most part, I just kind of reflected on like, okay, why do I want to do this? What do I want to get across? What are like my main 5 points? One thing I want to bring up is if a negative medical experience brought you to medicine, which is kind of part of my story, you do have to be careful about how you write about it to make sure that you don't seem too like angry, if that makes sense. Sometimes it can come across really badly if there's MDs reading being in the world, there's definitely some stigma involved if you have a story that relates to negative medical experiences or relates to disabilities or health conditions. Some health conditions shield themselves with umbrella terms instead, like don't say the exact diagnosis, but maybe describe a difficulty from that diagnosis. So that way that's snapping against you as they're reading your essay. And also there really aren't cliche stories. I feel like we all want to help people, so we're all cliche. Like Monica said, don't really worry about it. And I guess one thing that really helped me was after I was done writing an essay and I was like, okay, I'm really done here, I would just leave it for like 2 days into a PDF so it looked different, and then read through it like totally fresh. And I would catch so many weird like mess ups or typos or errors or just like things that just sounded really badly, I don't know, like bad tone. So it's really important to kind of look at it with a fresh brain and like in a fresh document.
Totally. I think writing can also be very personal, so it can be hard to share your narrative with someone. But I think it's super important to find at least one person that you trust to look over your essay, and that you kind of take those critiques and implement them, because sometimes someone else they just have fresh eyes, right? So they can give you some good advice and some pointers.
One quick thing is that when you're reading back your personal statement or having someone else read your personal statement, is that by the end of it, they should know without a doubt why you want to become a doctor, and specifically a doctor, not just go into medicine, but be a physician, and like how you got there. My personal statement, what do you think my reasons are for wanting to become a physician? And if that's not clear, then you writing to do, or even let it out. Okay, paragraph 1, this is reason 1 why she wants to be a physician. Reason 2, reason 3, and there were a couple of paragraphs where I was like, I don't really know. So am I hitting 100%?
I want to bounce ideas. I do that for pre-meds all the time, where I read the paragraph and I try to write like one sentence summary of what that paragraph told me about them. And sometimes it's hard to take out pieces of yourself out of a personal statement, but if it doesn't go into the reason why you want to enter medicine or be a physician, you really don't have to include it, even if it feels very important to you. So that's the tough part.
And just a tip for if there are reapplicants listening in right now, you can use your personal statement to dedicate a paragraph to talking about what you did as a reapplicant and I guess what you learned during your time reapplying. I think that is very helpful, especially if those like people who are reading your application, it gives you a sense of like, hey, like I didn't get in the first time, but this is how I've improved. And so it answers that question in the back of their mind of whether, you know, you have what it takes.
Monica, do you want to start? So I actually wasn't a transfer student. I can speak a little to like AP classes and how those apply, but yeah, I think Yelena, you transferred, so maybe you could also speak up to this, but yeah, I don't have, yeah.
That's helpful. I can get started. So when I was in high school, I decided to go out of state for college and 2 years ago. And so I transferred back to the University of Washington 2 years in, and then I completed undergrad here in Seattle. So the first thing I would say for this question is you want to make sure that your credits actually transfer over. The way that my Gen Chem, OChem, bio stuff was at the first institution was run differently than the way it was at my second school. So there was some coursework that I had to repeat just to get transfer credit or just to get credit for it. And that took time and it took money. But and for me personally, it was more important that I have a location that I wanted to be, that's just something that I had to be okay with. I was also asked about my transfer during my interview. That's also something that I would mention in your application. That's less credit focused, but you definitely want to address, you know, the reasons behind that. I would say, but beyond that, I don't think that your transfer credits affect your application because AMCAS has a way of kind of figuring out whatever grades you got, whether that's a number grade like a 3.7 or a letter grade, an A, into their own kind of notation. So they'll come up with their own like overall GPA, BCPM GPA, and your humanities GPA for all those things. If there are any more transfer specific questions, I'm happy to answer them after the panel, or feel free to put them in the chat box.
Yeah, so just real quick on AP credits, because I know that's a common thing. I don't know if any of you are in high school. So generally how it works is med school will count that as like credit as it would your normal, you know, all the classes you take in college, as long as your college gives you credit for it, like it has to appear on your college transcript. The other thing is generally, I don't think med schools will accept certain classes as a substitute for college classes, mostly within the science realm. I don't know if this is different. Like, for example, when I was in undergrad, I believe that like any like AP biology or chemistry or whatnot would not count as part of the series. So you have to like take it again in college. But like my writing classes counted from a medical school perspective. And it may depend school to school, but just, you know, make sure you are aware of those things. And then the only other thing I will say is that I was chatting with someone who was asking about like, does it matter what school you go to for undergrad? And I don't think it does. there may be some bias if you're trying to go to like an Ivy League. They may have like an Ivy League medical school. There may be some bias there still, but I'd say any general medical school beyond that, they won't care if you started out a 2-year and then transferred or whatever. You may be asked to explain it or talk about it like Monica did, but I don't think that should be, they won't look and be like, oh, well, this person went to X school and this person went to Y school, so the person that went to Y school is automatically better. You know, they will hopefully do a thorough job of reading your application and determine that you are a good applicant regardless of what undergrad you went to. And if they don't, then I would say that's not a school that you want to go to. If they are judging you solely off of where you went to undergrad, you don't want to be there because they are, you know, more focused on less important things that really matter.
I'll just chip in one last thing. And I see that Britt kind of commented on it too. I did almost all my prereqs science in community college. So I did 2 years of community college at one institution and then went to a different community college to finish up my organic chemistry and my general chemistry. And I did the community college. Sidebar, loved it, highly recommend small class sizes. I see Britt shaking her head, agreeing with me. And I didn't think that it really made a difference because I just had to make sure that all of those classes transferred, because I did have an issue where I took 2 chem classes and they didn't transfer and they had to be done as a complete block. And so just calling, I really want to go to this to your school. I really should count towards medical school. But if you have questions about that, people are almost always welcoming and helpful.
I'd say also departments have a lot of power. Oh, sorry, departments have a lot of power. So if you were having an issue in the Department of Chemistry and your things aren't transferring, just reach out to them and be like, hey, what happened? Especially if you're jumping institutions. So definitely reach out.
One thing I would just add on the AP credits as well, because that's pretty much, I came in with like 60 AP credits. Like I was a big fan of AP. And when I looked at applying to med schools, when you use, I don't know if it's still called the same thing, schools and everything, I didn't take intro to biology. I didn't take like any math in college. I didn't take, I took stats and everything in high school, and they actually didn't require me to retake any of them. And I've heard it is common for some schools. So Taryn definitely has a point that like there are some schools that will say it doesn't matter, you need to have. I was like, no, I took the intro to bio, but a lot of places will also take, if you have an upper division course. So I was a neuroscience major, so I had a lot of upper division science courses. So even though I skipped intro to bio, it's not like I tried to skip all my science classes in undergrads. So they were able to see that I was still able to maintain whatever grade they were looking for. It's always good, like they said, to do your research, but definitely MSAR is there all linking now. So thank you guys so much for doing that. Is a great, whatever reason I didn't want to apply to, because there's just so many. It can be helpful to do that when the time comes. You don't have to do it right now. But.
I think that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you so much for giving your insight on each one. If you guys want to just answer 1 or 2 questions that you saw pop up a lot in the chat, feel free to do so now. And for all the participants, if you guys want to screenshot this screen so you can contact the panelists later, feel free to do that.
So one question that I saw that someone asked in the chat that I think is super important to talk about is how do you avoid burnout during medical school, but also during pre-med? Because as I'm sure you are all aware and maybe have experienced already, like this is not an easy process. There are many highs, but there are also many lows on and you know, I think it's important to think about how read this mentorship, that kind of stuff. And I carve out time to, because even though sometimes it feels like you're taking away time from studying and you like are like, oh my gosh, I should be doing something else. Even in medical school, I find it important to do these things for me, because while I think back on my degrees and like all of the times that I thought, oh, I can't do this, I can't get patient to keep me going forward, because I remember being in your guys' shoes and being like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I will never make it into medical school, and now here I am. So that's something that just for me personally is like that refueling of the soul helps me reflect on my journey and remind me why I'm still going into this and along my path. And that's different for everyone, but I think it's so important, and it's not a waste of time. You will come back to your studying or whatever you're doing with like so much renewed passion and interest. Like I'm going to go study after this, and I will be much more motivated than I was before I started this. So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on burnout, avoidance strategies, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm like an activism vampire, because so the first couple months of med school, like as you're getting on your feet, you aren't really part of like national organizations, you don't really have a club that you're part of yet. And that was really hard for me because I refuel when I'm fighting things, basically. I am a weird person and I love advocating. I love like writing stern letters and just getting things done. So I have a lot of passion projects for like more LGBTQ plus stuff in medical school curriculum, and I getting that interactive hire. I highly encourage you to try to make
for not doing XYZ, or for not living your expectations. But I mean, you guys are saying go into a career where you're just giving other people. So students learn to be generous.
If someone tells you that's just because there isn't this designated institutional carving of it in the curriculum, don't listen to them. If that is what you are interested in, and if that is why you wanted to pursue medicine in the first place, do it. You would be surprised just how many of your colleagues are actually passionate about the same injustices that you are. And just because it's not covered in medicine doesn't mean it's important. In fact, I think that it should be a prerequisite for pre-meds to take a class in ethnic studies or to know what social justice involves, just because there's so many justices in the world right now. And it's hard for me to imagine my future physician not knowing what racism in America entails until they realize that BLM matters or that they posted up a black square on their social media. So my advice is, before you go into medical school, figure out how you communicate and how you can communicate better, because it does not make sense to have a course in med school that teaches future physicians how to communicate and offers them an introductory course of what racism involves. And you know that racism in medicine is so rampant that it does not get covered in curriculum. So I think when it comes to choosing what medical school you're going to, if they are espousing diversity initiatives during your second look or during your interview, critique those initiatives and talk to your upperclassmen, especially the students of color who have marginalized identities, how they feel about those initiatives and whether they've actually seen action taken by their institutions. And with burnout, it's okay. I think we're all I think as pre-meds and med students, we're all pre-programmed to have these like go-getter personalities. And it's not a bad thing for someone to call you type A. It just means that you're gonna do anything to get there, which is why you're on this path to medicine. But at the same time though, I think even as a third year student, not a lot of people talk about their times of vulnerability in med school. It's always often talked about within your first orbital of friends, and it just stays there. So I think like a great thing that all of us I think have touched upon is that we are actually very, very human. I know that there are like certain YouTube channels that talk about I wake up at 6 in the morning and I study from school. Like I skipped classes just because classes weren't working for me. I woke up at 10 a.m. I felt well rested, studied till 2 in the morning because I'm a night owl. So it's just kind of like med school. If they're telling you that there's this like regimented structure, I mean, if it works for you, go for it. But like, you honestly don't have to wake up at 5 in the morning to feel like an accomplished person, because that's a false narrative that's being produced by capitalism anyway. So if you want some real talk, just contact all of us and we'll let you know the real deal.
Yeah, for real though. I've been having to wake up at 5:30 every day to get to 6:30 sign out on my IM rotation, and I am not a better person for it. Let me tell you, it is so much worse. Anyways, I won't rant on that too much. But I did want to, oh shoot, there was something I want to say about what Pearl was saying, and now I forgot it. Well, okay, I wanted to, a bit of a pivot, but I did want to share my personal story of being rejected from medical school, since it hasn't really fit in anywhere else. And I don't know if Pearl and Britt want to share their stories too, but I think it was a really important question or a really important lesson for me that I learned. And so just the TLDR version, and apologies if you've heard me speak about this before, is that when I got rejected from medical school the first time, I had a conversation with the director of admissions of my dream medical school, and I was told, you should consider something other than medicine, which is the absolute last thing you want to hear when you are actively trying to figure out, how can I be better, and reapply to medicine. And that kind of goes to my point earlier of not all advice you get is good advice, because had I followed her advice, I would not be in medical school right now. And that was like the lowest of the low points during my whole pre-med journey, was trying to come back from that, because you think these directors, they're so, who am I to think that if this director who's so involved in this process says I can't get in, like she's the director of admissions, if she says I can't get in, like I'm donezo, but really what it took was a lot of self-reflecting, talking with the people that know me really well, that know me better than this director who talked to me for all of 10 minutes, and better than my interviewers who talked for me for all of 30 minutes, and somehow decided I was not cut out for medicine. In talking with other people, I realized that I know myself better than them. And if I am, if I feel like I'm cut out for medicine, then I cannot let them stop me, and I can't let myself stop me, even more importantly. I recognize that I did not do my best job of representing myself during my first cycle, and that's why I believe I didn't get in. It wasn't that I didn't have the right experiences or the right personality or any of those things. I just didn't do a good job of representing that. So when I reapplied the next cycle with barely any changes in terms of adding new activities to my application. But what changed was the way that I focused on representing myself and speaking about my experiences. And that's all it took to get in. And I got into that very same school that director said I couldn't get in. So all to summarize, like really you have to ignore the naysayers, because there will be so many. I hope it's not coming from your family and friends, but you will see it from like I've had random advisors throughout, like try to discourage me or whatever. And you just really have to anchor yourself on, I know myself better and I can do this. You will have to, potentially work a little bit harder to prove that, but I think you can get in if you want it enough. And also to all the pre-med ladies out there, this is what I remembered, what I wanted to say to Pearl's point, is that don't let people discourage you from going into medicine, or, there's still this sexism thing that it completely baffles me. But also like when you're like trying to do a lot, don't let anyone tell you you're too much. I had a colleague of mine, a fellow medical student who, when we were giving feedback to each other, said that I was too much, which I pushed back on. And I think that he was doing too little, which is also hilarious, because while he was saying I was doing too much, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. So, you know, put all that stuff aside. And again, just focus on you, focus on knowing yourself. And like, seriously, do not let anyone convince you that you're not cut out for medicine. All right, that was a long rant, but I always like to share that story. So
I have a weird story about, so basically my dream school changed from my first cycle to my second cycle because I realized there was a lot of red flags by paying more attention to the school about me. Just like one page. It was a huge accident. I looked at it, and of course I printed it out. Of course I read it. Essentially, leadership, which I was really, really into throughout university. They didn't think my research was like at all as rigorous as it actually was, and they kind of were like, oh, she's just a research assistant, or she's just a research tech. She can't possibly be doing anything like that's actually research. And things like that. So I printed it out. I basically burned it in effigy. There was like, because I'm from Portland, so there's a Pedalpalooza ride, which is like a group ride of like, you know, hundreds of people. We just went and burned stuff to like get rid of it out of our thoughts, out of our minds for the year, basically. So I went and I burnt that paper and I kind of let go of it. And that was really important to me, just to kind of take those comments, be like, oh, ow, and then get rid of them, because those comments weren't right at all. And when I reapplied, I was actually like, I don't know, I feel like a lot like Taryn was saying, like my GPA and MCAT didn't change. It was just like the way that I wrote about myself changed. And I really, because I had that experience, I really made sure that I stressed how important the things I did were and like how much I actually accomplished, because I was kind of too humble before, I think. So yeah, that's just my little spiel.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I definitely want to say that you all are amazing, and hearing your stories just made me realize how much we do not need to be like a robot to get into medical school. And we're all human, and we can make mistakes and learn from it. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. I know that all of the participants must have taken something away from this, and we definitely hope to connect with you in the future and do more panels like this. And for all the participants watching, if you guys could follow us on social media, it would definitely help us out in just getting these events out there and making people more aware. And with that, I think we will end this panel. Thank you so much for attending.
thanks for having us.